an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, Shadow Book 2 of Darkness and Dawn. In these chapters, it seems like Lucan is dead. I can't decide if I believe it or if I don't. But either way, this was actually pretty shocking. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat. So, oh man, y'all, truly, as much as the way Lucan's chapter ended, and it seemed like he had died, being in a character's POV and they seem to just, pass out, it could go either way. They could actually be dead. I've been in the POV of characters that have been actually killed before, so it's not impossible to do and be convincing. But there was a part of me that just kind of thought, okay, this is going to be something maybe non-lethal. Maybe just putting him into a sort of sleep stasis. When they tell Shera that he is gone, they being Carrion, I genuinely had a bit of a gasp. I just really trusted that he was going to be okay. And I posted, when I shared the link for this transmission, so to speak, I posted in that comment, the caption for it, that I should have seen this coming. And I'm beginning to realize that maybe the introduction of Darius as a character makes more sense knowing that Lucan is going to be taken off the board, because we need another reader who is also really powerful, who is also extremely empathetic, I guess is the word I want, compassionate. And it's specifically mentioned a couple times that when Shera looks at him, there is something about Lucan to Darius, which I could say is maybe just a personality thing. The fact that he doesn't have a face and she's saying this is the part that makes me sort of pause and go, well, is that it? I just don't know if I really think he's dead. And a part of me is it's one of those things that I always struggle with. I love this character. I don't want them to be gone. But I also want there to be a real, consequence to what is happening. A real sacrifice. And a character seeming to be dead and then just turning out to not be. That is a pretty difficult thing to pull off and still be very satisfying. I can't help but think he actually is dead, and that Darius is sort of in its way, a confirmation that he's dead. And so often what we deal with in books is and TV. If I don't see a body, they're not dead. They're definitely coming back. That has just proven to be true time and time again. We have a body, and we have people who are actual fucking professionals checking him for any signs of life, and there does not seem to be any. Except when they bring the body, Shera's ability to feel and sense everybody grows stronger. She is attributing that to Cyphron also being with them. And perhaps that's all it is. But it did raise an eyebrow for me. So, you guys, I just wasn't expecting it, and I'm really fucking pissed that I am really pissed at the way it goes down, because it feels incredibly unnecessary, and I don't mean from a writing perspective, obviously. I mean, in terms of the situation he was in, where all of the, like, conversation that was happening pointed to the fact that they might be all working towards the same goal, and maybe we could have this, like, be a mutually beneficial alliance. I am just kind of disgusted. So, all right, let's back up. We'll start with chapter 15. So the last chapter ended, well, the last Lucan POV chapter ended with him getting in touch with the stones of the floor. And I was wondering, what is he going to do? And it just says, the courtyard rippled upward. The 3 members of the Testament's crew were sent sprawling, even the paralyzed Dalton Foster. They toppled like dolls, even as Lucan stood on a frozen island in the midst of a stone sea. When he parted contact with the floor, his head was already beginning to ache, the first sign of reader burn. If he used his powers much more, he'd be useless. So he captures everybody, and it is a really, like, the fact that he has reader burn is what sort of leads to him not being able to defend himself. You know, he uses up what he can when he is saving Maya's life. And it turns out, by the way, the girl that he saw that I had thought had to be Maya is not. She is just somebody who apparently underwent a similar, like, procedure to Maya. So she's got a similar look to her, but it does turn out that Maya is actually here. So it was a bunch of little, like, fake outs here. So he ties everybody's hands, and he sits down in front of them, and Calder is like, you're not going to just fucking kill us? And he says to Calder, I just like to make sure my victims actually deserve it. And they go back and forth a little bit, with Calder being surprised by this. And he says, yes, I know you. You are Calder Martin, 26 years old, tried before the Emperor for counts of sabotage, theft, destruction of imperial property, instituting a jailbreak, and conspiracy to commit fraud, sentenced to forced labor in the service of the Navigators Guild. That's not exactly the list I remember, but it's impressively comprehensive nonetheless. And Lucan actually remembers him here. After multiple run-ins with Shera, a few memories had shaken loose. Do you remember meeting us as children? You tried to attack the Emperor, and I helped hold you back. It was a test of our reaction speed. And Calder is like, what? You were that young and you were already serving the Emperor. You must be really good. And Lucan says, I am, but then Calder is like, but we did see you sneaking around. I love the fact that Lucan is, like, really kind of offended by this. This bums him out. He knew he was out of practice. He was aware, but he thought he had, like, managed to pull it off. And he does not. Imperial guards show up. And they have weapons. They're checking in with their people, like, are you guys all okay? And they are freed. And Calder is like, so Lucan, why did you just hang around instead of bailing? What are you even doing? And Lucan says, I thought I'd wait to have a word with the guild head in charge. And Calder gets very salty and is like, well, why do you think I'm not in charge? And Lucan just basically is like, guy, come on. We both know that you're not. It's very obvious that you're not. Come on. And Calder is like, all right, well, granted, but still, that was, like, really uncalled for. So this is when he says, I was supposed to sabotage the Aptasia, but I've realized that we have to destroy it. And Calder is like, all right, maybe we have something in common here. So then we cut to him inside the chambers. His weapons were confiscated as well as anything he had in his pockets. The blonde, orange-eyed woman in charge knew that he was a reader, and as such she treated anything on his person as a potentially invested weapon. They even took the shroud from his face, leaving his nose and mouth bare, and the only reason they didn't strip him was Calder's insistence that they hurry. This is an aspect that hadn't really occurred to me, is just the idea that, like, you can't just leave anything on a reader. It's not just about taking their knives away. Like, if they have a book of matches even, you're just better off fucking taking it. That makes sense, but it is kind of scary to realize that anything they're holding on them could be that dangerous and look that innocuous. So he explains to them what the Aptasia is, and Calder says he had this but never used it. And Lucan says, one time that I know of, I gathered that he used it more often when it was built. And I thought that this was interesting because, like, saying one time that I know of implies that you are only really aware that he ever used it once. But in the conversation that we see happening amongst everyone when the Emperor gets into the Aptasia in the flashback later, he talks about using it several times and realizing that it's starting to get to him more and more. So I just found it weird. Like, I feel like the better way to say that would have been one time that I was present for, or something like that, because he does know that it's more than just the one time. And I don't know if that's just him being stingy with information on purpose because of his training or what, but yeah. And when Calder is like, why didn't he use it more? Lucan's like, do you want to read it? Because that would let you know why. And he says something like, it's like staring into the eyes of Kellerak himself. The captain responded as though his thoughts were elsewhere. Kellerak doesn't have any eyes. And Lucan is watching him kind of like, what does that mean? And Calder's like, it's common knowledge. And I'm like, I mean, maybe, but we know what the deal is here, really. Feel free to read this for yourself. It's a conduit straight to the great elders. The Emperor was afraid to use the device lest he draw too much attention, but now anyone who sits in that thing might as well feed themselves to Thanakar. And later on, when Calder's wife is brought in, he's like, explain what this would do to you. And he says, it would core you like an apple, and then they'd put whatever they wanted in the space that was left. Something like that. That was very evocative, and I was just like, ooh, that's so, like, it was just really well said. So much so that even Calder within the scene is like, that really gives an impression, doesn't it? So, this is when he brings in Maya. And for a moment, when he sees her, Lucan kind of loses it. And I love the way that Calder responds to this, because he sees what Lucan is about to do. He can feel Lucan is like going to absolutely lay this place waste. And he uses his abilities to pull his wrist through the ropes, as if through cobwebs. And what kills me is that he doesn't actually do anything here. So if he maybe hadn't made this move, it wouldn't, maybe his like reader burn wouldn't have been so bad that later on he wouldn't have been able to defend himself. Like, if he had just kind of held off here, perhaps he would have been able to manage some sort of protection, and I don't even know what that would look like. So yeah, he does this. Everybody like freaks out, slams him to the ground, and Maya has to be like, hey dude, chill out. You know I could have gotten out of this if I wanted to. I called her being like, convince your friend, hurry, please. And she says, when we get back, I'll have to report myself to the architects. It wasn't a joke. Maya was serious. He didn't need his reading to understand a friend he'd known since they were both children. She sincerely believed she deserved punishment for a lapse in judgment. More than anything, that convinced him she was in control of her own actions. No one expected more out of Maya than Maya. Can I just say, that is the fucking, theme of my life, and it's tiring, and I really feel for her. I really do. Maya is, low-key somebody that I'm rooting for because I want to believe that I can overcome my own, just painful drive to succeed at all things, always. It's just exhausting. So he says, so what's the assignment? And she just says, stop the elders. They're the highest priority. The imperialists can't keep an emperor on the throne if he's constantly under threat of elder possession, and the independents can't successfully establish a new world order if they're only serving the world up to the elders piece by piece. We should be working together, not against each other. And Lucan is just thinking, this is her flying in the face of orders and rules that she was given. This is wild if she is willing to flout things this way. And he asks, did the architects order you to do this? And she says they would, which I thought was really interesting, that she feels confident enough that almost it isn't breaking the rules at all to her, because she's just that confident. This is what she would be told to do either way. So this is when he says, whatever else we do, the guilds can't dance to an elder's tune. A strange expression crossed Calder's face at the words, and Lucan thought he detected a whiff of unease in the man's intent. But then the reader burn kept Lucan distracted enough that he almost missed the navigator's next words. I thought that was interesting. I'm not entirely sure what that moment was. If it's something in reference to an event in the last book that I've forgotten, or if it's something that is going on in his storyline, which is, happening at the same time as this one. I'm very curious to see when I get to this moment in the other book, what he was thinking at that moment. So he says, anyone who can look past our guild rivalry is someone I can work with, and your personal knowledge of the Aptasia will come in handy for our next guest. And here comes the best moment, where the guard captain doesn't know what he means. And he's like, can you bring in the next guest? And she's like, we don't have another one. And he finally has to be like, my wife? And she just is like, oh. It says disgust lit her face, but she bowed and moved out of the room. That would have worked better if I hadn't been forced to explain. More dramatic. Calder, sir. He is a drama queen, though. For real. And it's fine. There's a reason that shit is, such a feature in so many people, and it's because it's effective. People really do kind of fall for that. So here comes Jyrene. I'm so annoyed with Jyrene. Jyrene. I'm so annoyed. Okay. She comes out and is very resentful of the fact that Calder is just summoning her and then putting her back into her cell, apparently. So this is giving us a clue as to what he's dealing with, because, the question of how he was going to handle getting his wife back, but also knowing that she had betrayed him. Evidently, he's keeping her locked up also. I am absolutely dying to know what his feelings are throughout all of this, because this must be killing him. So he says that it's one of the perks of being the emperor, and she says, you're not the emperor, but you could be if you would just listen to me. And he's like, well, that's why I asked you here, because I do want to listen. So what do you think I should do with this? And he points to the Aptasia, and she's like, you sit in it. And he's like, okay, yeah, then what happens? I'm not a reader. No, you're a soulbound, but I have every faith in your ability to answer the question. As I understand it, the device will expand your awareness. And she talks about this, like, the function of this in a very... the best term I can use is optimistic. Maybe you could use the term naive. But she really just makes it sound like, oh, you just can connect to it and it will work for you. And there's no sense of proportion to what she's saying. And he says, including the great elders, of course, including the great elders. That's the whole point. This is the only way for you to understand them and to negotiate with them on an equal level. With you on the throne, humanity will have someone to speak to the elders on our behalf. You have a seat among the immortals. It is something we all desperately need. We've heard from the crazed elder cultist. Now let's hear from a neutral party. And he brings up Lucan, and she's like, you think he's neutral? And it's an interesting moment because Lucan, I had forgotten that he thought Jyrene had died. Because, reminder, the way that she is rescued by her people, the whole, like, cell basically collapsed. So it looked like she could have been killed. There was like blood as well, because there were other circumstantial things that happened that sort of made it look like somebody died here and could have been reanimated or something, because that was what was going on. So there is all this uncertainty, even though in Shera's POV, she's just like, we never found a body. She isn't dead. It's just as simple as that. So Calder, when he sees her, is kind of like, oh, well, I'm actually glad that you made it out alive. And I'm just knowing that she is going to be the one who kills him, and he's over here like, I'm glad you're still around. It's breaking my fucking heart. This is when he says, what would happen to me? And Lucan replies, you would go insane in minutes, perhaps seconds. The great elders would core you like an apple and put whatever they wanted in your place. That is some compelling imagery. Jerry, your rebuttal? And this is when she brings up Shera and says, do you know her well? And he just says, we worked together. She looks at Maya and says, do you know her? And Maya just is like, I don't need to tell you anything, so I don't have to even answer you. And Jyrene nods, and something flashes green under her hair. And it says, had Calder allowed his wife some jewelry? I am absolutely dying to know why she was allowed to keep her soulbound object. Does he not know what it is still? Is he still thinking it, like... The whole idea of soulbound objects is that they tend to give off a pretty strong aura. And Calder is a reader. How did he not figure this out yet? It's possible that she has some sort of, like, means of getting it back. I don't know. But the whole thing here is predicated on the fact that she has this to source power from to make her attack. And I can't figure out how this was allowed. So she says, I've been warned against Shera quite recently. However little you know of her, let me assure you, she is the greatest threat to you and the future of humanity, not any guild. And Calder asks, who warned you? Which is a good question, because she shouldn't have been in contact with anybody. But as we know, her people are able to, like, get in contact with her through various means. Apparently, that is still happening. And again, I am just like, I suppose that nobody except Lucan was there to see the way that she communicated outside with the outside world before. So maybe they didn't know to keep an eye out for this. But even so, you know that you're dealing with people who fuck with shit that you aren't willing to. And I would just be so much more cautious about her. And it has to just be his attachment to her sort of blinding him. That's the best I can do. And just assuming like, well, she would never, because he wants to think that she at least wouldn't continue with her mission now that she's been found out. Now, like, he's trying to give her some benefit of the doubt, I think, and it's just not the time to be doing that. That's my thesis, but I don't really know. You know, obviously, we'll find out, hopefully. So, the fact that she says, she is the greatest threat to you and the future of humanity, I am dying to know why. What makes it her? And what is it that she could do? Anyway, so yeah, she says, whether you believe it or not, she's your enemy and I'm your ally. And this is when she whips around and she takes a shot at Maya. And Lucan, despite his reader burn, makes Maya's clothing suddenly weigh like 20 pounds so that she staggers and just drops a little bit. And the bolt just barely misses her. Which is honestly, what a neat idea. Because I was like, okay, he can do something. But the ideas that White comes up with for what readers can do and how they can, like, it's reading, it's not just about like being able to see these objects and read their histories. There's a lot of imagination that has to go into figuring out how to use certain things as weapons or defense. And that's just a really smart idea. All he needed was for her to move like a tiny fraction and making her clothing suddenly weigh more. I mean, that would never occur to me. I just love that. So he blacks out because he had such burn already and he did this thing that was pretty intense. And he wakes, like he opens his eyes and he sees that Maya is still alive. Something caught his attention on the other side. Gyrene Tessela Martin, looking into his face from only a foot away. She stared at him amidst a forest of Imperial Guard boots. "I'm sorry," she said, and her eyes told him she meant it. He'd read her before. She was committed to a cause that all of his experience taught him was crazy and outright evil, but she believed it to her core. It informed her, guided her every decision. She was wrong, but he couldn't hate her. Not even when another finger-thin blast of green flame blew through his stomach. Why isn't it hot? He wondered. Fire was supposed to be hot. Instead, it felt as though he'd swallowed a bucket of snow. Well, at least it was a distraction from the reader burn in his head, which seemed to be fading away. And it ends with, he wasn't the one that napped. That was Shera. Now here he was sleeping in the middle of the day. She would be proud of him. First of all, how dare you? Second of all, I don't know, I think he's fucking dead. I'm so bummed. I'm interested in seeing how Shera reacts to all of this as well, because when she gets the news, she doesn't cry. I was sort of wondering if it would like come over her. And instead it really feels like more confusion. It's a grief that doesn't manifest in the way it does for most of us. And watching her kind of struggle through what she's feeling and this sense of like wanting to fall asleep to escape it, but not being able to, just, So, yeah, this bummed me out. Ugh. Wait, what? George is in the chat and says, Gyrene pro-life imagery? And then asterisk parallels. Gyrene parallels pro-life imagery. Is that what you're saying, George? Okay. For a second I thought, okay, I got you. So what you're saying is, yeah, that she really believes it. And, you know, this is the thing with people and their beliefs. It's like, all it comes down to for me is you can believe what you want until you start to affect other people's lives with what you're doing. That's when you draw the line. Belief, isolated to your life, go nuts. Believe whatever you want. But once it starts to be a thing that you're using against others, then we have an issue. So, chapter 16. And we get a little bit of an excerpt here. Later manuscripts mention the emperor's attempts to build a particularly large or intricate optasia, but those references faded away in the 2nd century. The idea is now largely considered mythical, which is pretty interesting. You know, the idea that, like, this is something that they knew was a possibility. Like, scholars were aware of the concept of it. So this isn't completely out of left field, but they just assumed that, yeah, well, it doesn't really work. And nobody really has ever successfully done it. And it certainly doesn't exist anymore. So we go back to Shera's POV here. And this is 6 years ago. Or 5 years ago, my bad. And it is in the midst of an elder attack. It is wild. And what is so upsetting about this? Because this is all Akhmagut. This is the elder who is focused on, like, knowledge and curiosity. I have often said, in terms of the things that I find the scariest, there's all kinds of different tropes in horror, right? You've got, like, undead creatures. You've got ghosts or, like, demons. You've got serial killers. You've got, like, just sadists, straight up sadists. And then there's always the medical horror. And it will manifest as either like a doctor or a dentist, or sometimes it'll be like the experimentation happening at like a mental asylum. And all of that for me is absolutely like 1,000% more terrifying than anything. And I think it's because, one, I know how real that has been. And even like women's reproductive health, a ton of the knowledge that we have that founded like obstetrics and gynecology was discovered by the experimentation on black women with no anesthetic by a fucking lunatic doctor, who, by the way, has like a statue dedicated to him in some city that I think they're talking about taking down. But he is called the father of gynecology, and he was a torturer. And yet, he didn't see it that way. He did not see black women as people. Their pain was absolutely irrelevant. And whether they were suffering, well, that was just data to be collected. How much are they suffering? And, you know, like probably for like actual human women, it's not going to be quite the same. And maybe their suffering even for human women wouldn't matter for him. I don't know, because God knows there are a lot of procedures women undergo without anesthesia to this day that is just mind-blowing, because our pain is frequently not taken seriously. And this description of all of these elders doing these awful things just to stand back and observe the way that humans react, this for me is so terrifying. It's one thing to enjoy inflicting pain on somebody. There's an emotional element to that as much as I can't understand it, and for me, inflicting pain is something that I try to avoid. I don't even kill bugs that are in my house. As much as I don't understand it, there is an aspect of it that feels sort of familiar in the way that being hungry and wanting junk food is familiar, where you are driven to do something that is damaging because you have this need that feels out of control. There's something about that I feel like I can understand in a way. But the idea of just doing horrific things in a clinical way, where you are inflicting this and then you're stepping back and there's absolutely no compassion, there's no interest. A sadist, they inflict pain and they watch and feel an emotional response to that pain. It is still based in a reciprocal emotional response that feels, even if it's horrifying, a little bit human. There's something in that I'm like, all right, well, you're obviously a monster, but I can understand how this is working for you. But people who can simply cut themselves off and do this sort of thing without feeling any real connection to what they're watching happen, and just completely divorce themselves and take notes, that is something that I am terrified of, because for me, that means there's something wrong with you. And I know that this kind of experimentation existed and exists, and probably a lot of it is necessary to the progress of medical science in general. And to that, I can't help but think, how worth it is it? How worthy are our results for what we wind up sacrificing to get them? And that's just something that, I'm never going to get all the information, and I don't know how to tally that sort of thing. There's no real answer. But these things being they're not taking delight in the destruction they're causing. They're not gleeful. They're not chasing people around, tormenting them for fun or because they're trying to take over their bodies. Like Nkothi, her whole thing is just I'll give you another life. It's not that. They're blocking off exits and then setting things on fire so that people are burned alive to just watch the way they react to being burned alive. They are taking people apart and rummaging around inside their bodies just to see what's going on in there, what they're made of, essentially. At one point, there is a woman with a child who they are surrounding and sort of prodding at, and eventually take the child away just to see her response to that. It's just the whole energy behind this is so scary. And I know that I said that the girls looking at that dark patch in the wall and realizing that an elder can start to get into your head from fucking almost anywhere was a moment of real terror for me. But Akhmagut, seeing the people who had started to be sort of entranced by him on that island, that's one thing. This is he is setting up a massive, I don't really know what to call it. It's like a laboratory. And we find out, by the way, this is happening everywhere. Like, Shera understandably thinks they're coming after the palace because of the emperor, and that's where they're targeting. And it turns out, not so. Akhmagut, like, knew that the emperor had assumed it was going to take years for him to, like, complete his research and make a move. And so he was like, well, what if I don't then? And I really hate the fact that I just completely accepted the emperor's assumption that it would take a long time. I totally, without question, was like, well, he knows. And I should have known he isn't really, like, hip to it yet, what's going on. He's trying his best, but as we find out later, he hasn't been able to use the Aptasia, so a lot of his, like, understanding of things is limited now, and he isn't able to. That's part of the reason why they went in person to the island, is because he wasn't able to get a good sense of what was going on and act from afar the way he had been. So yeah, this whole scene is so, like, the progression of seeing the horror and then Shera beginning to put together what it is that they're doing, why they're prodding and watching and seem to be detached. It's really chilling. So eventually she winds up, what's the word I want? I suppose rendezvousing, with Maya and Lucan. And Lucan shows up first, and she realizes how, like, freaked out she was that something had happened to him. She wasn't even quite aware how worried she was. And when he asks where Maya is, Shera is just like, oh, she'll be fine. And Maya pops up, like, right then and is like, it would be cool if you worried about me a little bit more, which I did think was pretty funny. So the whole scene too with the mother and her child. This is so awful because Shera is trying to think of any way that she could help. And she just isn't, like, there's too many of them. She doesn't have the kinds of weapons she needs. She is worn out, and also, even if she weren't, she probably wouldn't be any match for, like, more than one of these. She didn't know the woman, and she had a job to do. And she turns around, and Lucan stops, and he is just agonized over this. And she has to tell him, I don't have anything that would help. Lucan ground his teeth, but he was still a gardener. He shoved the knife into its sheath behind him, holding on to the black rock as though he was afraid to let it go. After a count of 3, he hurled the stone into the crowd of elder spawn almost on top of the mother and daughter, and kept running down the hallway to the side. With a flash of light and a rumble of thunder, when a flash of light and a rumble of thunder rang out from behind them, neither turned around. So essentially, he has to kill them both, because there's nothing to be done, and they probably would have been continued to be tormented for experimentation purposes if they didn't do something. And that really got me. Like, it's best to put them out of their misery for sure. I don't think he made the wrong decision, but having to make that kind of decision is awful. So this is when they get to the Emperor, and he is absolutely laying waste. It is wild. When he waved the staff, elder spawn were shredded by invisible blades. Inquisitors started as arachnid monsters and ended in piles of purple gore and severed eye stalks. Other stranger creatures opposed him as well, gilled humanoids with crocodile mouths, shambling dead children shaped to look like giant animals, even an elder's rendition of a twisted animated thorn bush. And he just keeps on going at them, and all of the people who are, like, huddling and being protected by him are watching in absolute awe. And Everything caught in the ripple of power was shredded. Stone, decorative plants, and elder flesh alike. A few of them let out hideous shrieks as they died, but most never got the chance. And they have to watch this like wall of force coming at them. And she's sort of thinking to herself, I really just have to hope that he has the control I think he has, because it looks like we are about to be destroyed. I don't think we are, but damn does it look like it. And it says the wall of force carried debris up to the gardener's feet, where the garbage landed like a collapsing wave. In the ensuing silence, even the children did not dare to cry. So the emperor at this point sends Lucan and Maya away. Escort these few to the southern gates. General Teach has a foothold there. And this is the moment where he talks to Shera about what happened when she got together with Teach. And it's very clear that he knows precisely what is going on. And he tells her, I need you to really remember, the elders will do anything. You can't let them have anything. And she's realizing he must be assuming the moment to kill him is coming up pronto, or else he wouldn't be reminding her of this. And he says that it's an imperial command. And she says, yes, your imperial highness, and then realizes that she's never actually said those words to him before. And then thinks strange, and I'm like, it's really not, Shera. We know you. It's not strange at all that you wouldn't have addressed him that way. Of course you wouldn't. So he explains, it's been 1,500 years since we defeated the great elders. In those first days, after the rule of the elders but before the empire, the world was in chaos. The earth itself rolled and heaved in the aftermath of the great elders' destruction. The people feared nothing more than the wrath of the elders. Many refused to believe that they could be overthrown at all, and that all humans would soon be punished for the transgressions of a few. And he is just like actually saying, they were ignorant, but also they weren't wrong. These guys are going to try and come back. They don't die. It's not like that for them. Death keeps them in stasis for a little bit. And then they start to wake up again. And we just didn't know what the time frame was on that. So we had to sort of play it by ear because this has never happened before. We needed an early warning system, but the great elders died thousands of miles apart. It took us decades to finally track down and kill them all. If they started to stir, I could never act in time, no matter how early the warning. I needed a way to respond to all the great elders from a single location. So I began the single most ambitious construction project I've ever attempted. As you may realize, that is a significant statement. And I love this. He shows them the Aptasia, and Lucan's like, that's a pre-imperial word for a divination tool. I don't care, Shera said. Shera, never change. So he says it's a symbol. The throne room is not where it's at. This is where it's at. And he opens the secret area, and they see this wild chair. And he talks about the night that they were on Nikothi's island. I had you meet me here not because I was woken from my sleep, but because I tried to use the Aptasia. I found that I could not. Truthfully, it worked too well. Sensing intent through the Aptasia is much like reading it directly, only on a global scale. Can you see why that might be a problem? You're reading elders directly? Lucan said, horror in his voice. Even Shera knew enough that she shivered at the idea. It was one of the great taboos of reading. When readers tried to examine elder intent, they had to do so indirectly. Otherwise, they risked facing the alien minds of the elders, and the result was almost always insanity. When I looked into the Aptasia, it was like staring at Nikothi once again. I had to stop immediately or forfeit my sanity. 4 years ago, when Akhmagut began to stir in the town of Silverreach, I ran my intent through the Aptasia again. This time, I tried looking at its surroundings, but I couldn't decipher his plan without examining more closely, and I had to give up before the temptation became too much. I went in person, only to discover that I had arrived too late. So you see, I have a problem. The more powerful the elders become, the more quickly and definitively I need to respond, which requires using the Aptasia. But the more powerful they are, the more using my device becomes like reading them directly. It's a strain. It gives her more room to act upon me, and I've been relying on it less and less. Now, events have outpaced me. So, this is when he says that this is happening everywhere. This is not just happening here in the palace. This attack is, he says it's not even limited to just this city, unless I'm very much mistaken. This is happening all over the world. So he says, all right, I think it's time. And he puts himself on the throne. It twisted around him, binding him in a meshwork layer of steel. In seconds, it looked less like a throne and more like a cage, with him locked at the center of an impossible puzzle. The last 2 times I've attempted to use this device, I've barely managed to escape with my sanity intact. I don't expect to do so this time. When I am finished, I will certainly be weak. I may be mad or enthralled. If you suspect I am not entirely in control of myself, you are to execute me. And Shera is just like, God damn it. I just had this conversation with Teach that I would try and let her know what was going on. And I'm already having to break my word. And she looks over and Maya's got tears in her eyes. And she's just like, whoa, Maya's crying. Like clearly shit has turned left. And I love the way they each deal with this. Maya starts crying. Lucan salutes and says, it has been an honor serving you. And Shera just shrugs and waves and says, we'll kill you if we have to. And I can't get over her. She is such a fucking weirdo. Shera, who are you even? And that chapter ends with, now that you're ready, let's begin. And I'm like, oh, that's where you end it. I want to see what happened. So then we come to the shortest of the 3 chapters, 17. And Shera is being brought to the Grey Island after Reminder killing the guild head of the Magisters Guild. And I had low-key forgotten about that by the time we got here. I won't lie. There's a lot happening, you guys, okay? There's a lot to keep track of. So they have separated her from Cyphron, and she's kind of relieved because it's meant that she can actually sleep without having to constantly struggle against this thing. And she gets 2 full days of sleep. And then when they arrive, they're greeted by Tyrell, who is just dressed up and looking great compared to how he normally looks. We've seen him before when he's, as she puts it, unshaven, hair wild, clothes unkempt. But today, he's got, a tailored suit on, and he's combed, and he's got the whole fucking, sales pitch going on. He is extremely smooth with his lying. The veil is a parlor trick more than anything else, Knight Adjunct. Nothing to intimidate you. It's not nearly as thick as it looks, and behind it waits a beautifully untamed island. Yet still with all modern amenities, of course. Bastion's veil was a product of the most powerful awakened artifact in consultant possession, and there wasn't an inch of the Grey Island that could be called untamed. I love this so much. Just the idea of somebody who can lie really well is fascinating to me, because when I was in my teens and early 20s, I lied a lot. And I lied in very effectively because I made myself believe it. And not genuinely, but I inhabited a role when I did it, and I was very convincing. And then I hit a point in my life where I suddenly couldn't bear to do it anymore. And I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden lying just took so much energy. And I was just like, no, I know it's going to cause me trouble, to be honest, but I gotta say it's probably going to be less than it would be to lie. And that's not to say that I don't, I just never lie in any way, but I don't do it the way that I used to. And the concept of being in a job where you have to, that was part of why I hated being in customer service, because you basically had to spend your whole day pretending that you wanted to be there helping people when the last thing you wanted to do was be there helping people. And this dude, he's basically in the customer service facing position here. He has my condolences. So they get off the ship. Darius is here. He looks around for Ayanna and she's already gone. And I love Tyrell just being like, yeah, sorry about that. We are pretty intense about stealth. And sometimes it means that we're rude without meaning to. Don't let it get to you. So Shera gets gripped up and brought to Carrion. And on the way, she's like, you want to tell me where we're going? And she thinks they're not going to answer her. But they tell her, and that should have been my first warning that this was going to be kind of a bummer. I feel like they know what is about to happen, what she's going to be told, and they have some sympathy for her, and they may not have answered her under other circumstances, So as she's coming forward, I had forgotten she doesn't know Lucan was sent on an assignment. So she thinks that she might be being put in a cell with him. And I'm still here operating on the assumption that he's been injured but is okay. And Carrion eventually says that they brought his body. And I was just like, wait, they what? His what? Yeah. This moment, guys, I was just not ready for it. She tells Shera about the mission. I had intended for Lucan to take a team of shepherds, but others felt it would be more resource efficient to send a gardener on his own. It was intended to be a simple reconnaissance mission. I didn't think anything of it when Lucan left without his team. We're not clear about what happened next. By all accounts, Lucan accomplished his objective, then elected to meet with Calder Martin alone. The Aptasia has been successfully destroyed, which we suspect would have accelerated the guild war with or without your actions. Lucan? His body arrived on the ship this morning. And Shera, of course, is like, you confirmed this. Are you sure? Now, first of all, the Aptasia has been destroyed? Really? Has it? Has it? I am also really wanting to know what the fuck Maya did to Jyrene, because it was probably very hard to hold her back. I think that was an ugly scene. If the Aptasia was destroyed, it was probably in the midst of a massive fucking blow up in which Maya lost her mind. But I don't know if I can trust that it was destroyed. I don't see why they wouldn't just send that in their report. The readers checked his condition at the same time as they began inspecting the imitation gardeners. We've sent his final action report down to the miners. Captain Martin sent a letter of personal regret, signed by the heads of the Imperial Guard and the navigators. It appears that they were close to some sort of an understanding. Either way, he died in the course of a successful mission. I really, obviously they didn't say what happened. Maya knows, and I'm assuming Maya's still alive. I'm really wondering what this is going to mean, because, it only stands to reason. Calder lost one of his team. He lost Urziah, right? in the last book. So for the consultants to not suffer any losses, there had to be somebody that got taken down that meant something. But I don't know if Calder has any idea how important Lucan was to Shera personally. And even if he did, I think that he would assume that Shera doesn't care about anything because he has a very specific idea of what she's like. So then we get this awful moment of her being sent to stay in that cell that Lucan had been in. And everything about Lucan is stripped from the room. And this is just, a metaphor for him being gone. This place was somewhere he lived and had made his own. And she thought she had a mental image of maybe being put in the same cell as him and being confined together. And for her to show up and find out that this place is emptied of all his stuff and he is gone in the most final sense of the word. This is so heartbreaking, you guys. It just killed me. It really did. So yeah, she's like not really even sure what she's feeling. She lays on the cot and just stares at the ceiling, and it says her emotions were too cold and sharp to touch, but she was sure she'd never felt this way before. There had never been a time like this before. She slept when there was something she wanted to forget or ignore, and surely this qualified. She kept coming back to one thing. She would never hear what he thought about her losing control and attacking Mackendy Maxius. That didn't seem fair somehow. She needed him to be mad at her and to listen to her explanation before ultimately forgiving her. And that got to me. Those are the things when somebody dies that kill. That realization that there are things you still wanted to tell them and you're not going to get to. Things that you should have maybe talked to them about long ago and you put off because you kept thinking you had time. But something that had just happened to you that day, the idea especially of it being something that she is ashamed of anyway, that she lost control the way that she did. She doesn't experience shame the same way most of us do, but it's still there for her with this, and he has been her conscience in a major way. So she feels the procession coming because Carrion had said that she's going to have them bring the body so that Shera can see him. And a dozen men and women in prime physical condition, though Carrion was slightly flawed because of her injury. Shera's extra senses sharpened and she picked up on little details around her cell. It was as though Lucan's intent radiated from everything, almost as though he was here, invisible with her. When the architects arrived with Lucan's body in tow, Shera took 15 minutes to assess his cold and waxy face. It was him, there could be no doubt, but she kept staring as though searching for a flaw. Carrion spoke to her, but Shera heard none of it. Before she realized it, she was back in her cell, and the sun had fallen into darkness. Inside, she grew only colder. And that is the end of the chapter, which just, I don't know, seems really rude to me. It felt like personal that he ended it there. But fine, I guess. So, yeah, I'm super sad. This was such a bummer. I was not ready. All right. I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again, George, for commissioning this. And I'm looking forward to next week. Hopefully, we get to finally see the scene where the Emperor gets taken down. We'll see. We'll see. All right, everybody. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.